I think the environment that you put yourself in, it matters more than anything else. So surrounding yourself with, I didn't know that there was teams. I don't think there was teams when I first started. That was like 11 years ago. So it's surrounding yourself by people who have higher standards. You learn that goals and standards are like the flip side of it. So if you have high goals, but then the standards that you're willing to accept are very low, there's no way you're going to hit that goal. So if you surround yourself with people who have very high standards, you're inevitably going to have the same equal standards and be able to develop, do more.
All right, how's everyone doing? I'm super excited today to share with you Kiro. Kiro is with NK Real Estate Group, brokered by EXP. I've known Kiro for a good long time, and we shared so many things, and Kiro has such a value of information, and I'm excited to bring him here today. Kiro and John Scipione has a Lighted Up podcast, and you guys can find him there. It's a lot of great information there as well. And Kiro, thanks for being on the Beyond the Sale podcast.
Awesome, man. Thank you, John, for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So Kiro, we originally met, I think, role playing. That's how I think I met you. I'm not sure if you remember something different, but role playing every morning. I think we were on a role play group at 7:30 in the morning, role playing Mike Ferry scripts. But tell me a little bit more about our audience is realtors, and tell us a little bit more about how you got into real estate. Why real estate? I mean, I know it's a kind of interesting profession, but how did you get started?
It's an interesting story. I got started when I was 18 years old, and it was almost by accident in a way. I never knew what I wanted to do going through high school. I was born in an inner city, so it was a very diverse culture. But then I had the opportunity to do something called a co-op program, which meant that for my senior year, I got to go to school for half a day and then work for the other half of the day. And I got rejected from all the applicants. Like, they gave us like suggested places to work at, or local banks in my city. And I got rejected from every single one of them. But then I was like, I'm not going back. I'm not staying longer than I have to in that school. So I'm like, get the hell out of here. So then I started hitting up people. I was like prospecting for places to work. And I ended up getting 2 jobs, one at an accounting firm and one at a restaurant that I can go in half the days. And then when I worked at the accounting firm, I ran into a bunch of people who were making so much money, and the common denominator was real estate. So I was like, all right, that's what I want to get into. So I started looking up in the Forbes list. I started seeing like different people who were making a crap load of money. And I was just like, this is interesting stuff. I figured that the step that would make the most sense is getting my real estate license. So got my license and had no idea what the hell I was doing. And thankfully, like, getting associated with Mike Ferry Coaching, that's when everything started changing rapidly. And the people that were around me that were doing it at a high level, people have this misconception that people who are performing at a high level won't share, but they're the people that would probably share the most and be the most open and honest with it, because they know the amount of sacrifice you have to, do and make to get there. And one of the guys who was a top performer in my industry is the reason why I got into coaching, reason why John got into coaching as well. That told me, he's like, hey, listen, just role play like a mother effer and just focus, be obsessed with skill development. So I was in 2 role play groups at a time. So I was one at 7 and one at 7:30. And yeah, that's I guess the gist of the story. It started with Weicker Realtors, which is a local brokerage, and then went to Keller Williams. Then John and I had a small independent, and then we transitioned over to EXP, separate teams.
Oh, cool. Yeah, cool. Yeah, so kind of similar to what I did too. Role played at 7:30, and then role played with the person at I think at like 8, and then jump on the phones after that, or role played with 7:15, then 7:30, and then got on the phone at 8. Cool, very cool. So, a question for you. So, do you think that we're working with a lot of agents, helping them grow their business, that sort of thing? Do you think anybody can do this? Do you think anybody can do real estate? I'm just curious.
Yeah, it's interesting because when you look at it through your lens, before you probably start interviewing or speaking to other agents, you're like, yeah, anybody could do it. It's just you have to want it. But you realize that not that many people want it, and that's the thing. It's a big struggle for a person who's focused on developing their skills to go into a team development kind of aspect, and then you become extremely surprised that people aren't as hungry. And then you understand that you need to start managing your own expectations and understand that people aren't like you. And then you start going through this internal thing where you're like, all right, well, everybody has their own goals and dreams. And if they're not willing to sacrifice a certain amount of things, then real estate isn't for them, or sales in general isn't for them. So I think it's something that can be developed within each person, but if the desire isn't there and it's lacking, then it's a dead end to begin with.
That's so so interesting, and I found it to be the same way.
Yeah.
I thought when I first got started that anybody can do it. I was like, if I could do it, anybody can do it. And then we hired people, and I think you're right. I think it's the want. Do they want to do it? Do they want it bad enough? And if they don't have a desire to want it bad enough, it's not going to work. And if they do want it bad enough, anybody can do it. Doesn't matter color, creed, your background, where you're from. Anybody can do it if you want it bad enough. Yeah.
You know how Grant Cardone has that saying, "This is the middle class sucks," and it's so true because there's like I went to college for maybe 2 semesters and I dropped out, right? And I know your story. Your family had a brokerage and they had real estate experience, right?
Right.
And you're one of the most educated people I know on the topics of anybody who knows you, especially when you sit in a room with you, you can see how you analyze things. You don't talk, you analyze things, and then you make a calculated decision on how you're going to proceed with them. And that's one thing I love and respect about you. But then that's like, there's two opposite spectrums. People who want to get out of the bottom tier and they're willing to do anything to sacrifice to get there. And there are people who have a lot of exposure and they're able to see like, this is normal. Like, yes, working longer hours is normal because you've seen it happen through your family, right? So it's like the people in the middle who want that comfort, it isn't something for comfort.
Interesting. Yeah, that's so interesting. And then a lot of times those people that, their dad worked 2 jobs or their mom works 2 jobs or come from a single mother or single parent background and they're seeing them work their butt off. They understand what work is and they see what they want and they can work there and get there. And then also you're right, since seeing someone work really hard and that's the expectation, then that's
a standard.
That's a standard. Yeah. And I've noticed that too. You have to want it. That's so interesting. You put it so well. So it like shifting gears a little bit, biggest influences getting started. I know. So it was cool because like you said, is like you kind of, none of those jobs worked out for you, but you prospected, you were kind of hungry. You didn't want to be in school anymore. You're like, I want to go out and work.
Yeah.
And then you saw what job created the most money and you said, that's what I want to do. And so it wasn't necessarily about like what I love to do. I love this. I love this. This is like lights me up. But it was like, hey, I just want to get money, and then once I have money, I can do whatever I could do the things I want to. I love from there. But I guess who was the biggest influence of once you got there to help you get to the next level?
So just to give like a little bit of context to it, so the high school I went to was the worst high school in all of New Jersey at that point in time. Top 1 or 2. So we had something called lockdowns on a regular basis, meaning that if there was a fight going on in the hallway, or if there was like my first day in that school, 2 guys pulled out a machete, tried robbing a cop for the gun. So that was my experience there. And my dad's feedback was, "You're men, you're gonna get strong. It's okay." I'm like, bro, I might not make it out alive. So that's why I opted into that program, just so that way I didn't have to be there for long.
Oh crap.
So I didn't know any better in terms of what industries to go into. So when I saw like this one guy, I don't even know what his name is. He rolled up in a Porsche Panamera, and then he walks in to the office, goes sees the CPA, and I'm sitting there and I'm like looking at numbers and I'm seeing zeros after zeros after zeros after zeros. When he leaves, I'm like, what does he do? He's like, well, he's in real estate, but he also flips companies. So he'll buy warehouses and like he'll like flip the businesses that are in there, make them optimal, and he'll sell the asset and he'll sell the business itself as well. And he's just doing that nonstop. So I was like, okay, that's really, really interesting. So when I went on like Forbes and I would look at like different things of whatever, I would see Carlos Julio, I'm probably saying his name wrong. He was in Mexico. Carlos Slim Julio. And
Carlos Slim.
Yeah. And then he was known for owning everything. And then when I started looking up real estate books, I think everybody got influenced by Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. And then when I learned that, and it was a big kind of smack in the face, where after I read it, I was like telling my dad, I was like, "What? Why did you do everything wrong?" He's like, "I didn't know anything different." I'm like, "You're stupid." like, you know what I mean? All the
my life
knowledge
would have been
these
so
books,
much easier.
Yeah, like I wouldn't have to go to that school. But your eyes open up when you start learning more. So biggest influence, Robert Kiyosaki, without a doubt. But without that moment of getting rejected from those, recommended employers, which were like banks in my area. I wouldn't have never saw that guy walk into that accounting firm, and then that wouldn't have made me look up the information. So,
So
biggest
yeah,
influence.
Robert Kiyosaki is he speaks about like investing, and he's not a realtor.
Correct.
So I'm interested to hear because I think a lot of I've just had this conversation before we got on this podcast is
Yeah.
that most realtors and the person I did the podcast with before, he's an investor. Most realtors get into real estate and they sell homes and they never buy any homes. They never buy real estate, but they sell
Yeah.
real estate, but they never buy it. Robert Kiyosaki says buy real estate.
Yeah.
Like so when you got into real estate, is the thought process to make money to buy real estate, or
Yeah.
how did that change over time?
So the whole goal was to be able to make money to, let's say like this, my dad's idea when I was telling him that whole conversation, and he was like, "Oh, why don't you, get into real estate? The best way to do it is probably getting your license." And because the realtors have the best deals, which you and I both know, we have access to an MLS, but doesn't mean we have access to the best deals if you're not looking for it. So I got into the business by the time I was 18. I bought my first property by the time I was 20. So I like ran right into it, and that was like I knew exactly what I wanted to do. Um, and so bought that when I was 20. By the time I was 23, I had 13 doors,
Wow.
and it was like awesome. And then I had a mentor who was like guiding me through it. And in 2018, he was like, sell everything. So I sold bigger stuff, and then it was a learning lesson because you can never, it's just learning how to assess it differently. But that book definitely is about building wealth and building freedom in the four quadrants. But I think to answer your question, a lot of real estate people get into the business, they get addicted to how they earn the money. And then they hear you need to level up your lifestyle. And then they don't level up the amount of activities and leverage anything. So then they end up becoming a slave to, just residential resale instead of actually being able to purchase anything and build wealth from there.
Yeah, no, I agree with that, and I've heard that taught to me too. And the other thing is too, it does motivate you. Like you have to keep paying the bills. Like you have to keep running on
Yeah.
that hamster wheel. However, it's like you can never get off, and
Yeah.
that's a problem. We both know people that were on that hamster wheel and can't get off because their lifestyle is here,
Yeah.
their income's here, and they they their body and their mind tells them they want to age out of that, but they can't. They just have to keep going. So
Yeah.
that's a problem. Yeah, that's really interesting. So okay, cool. So Robert Kiyosaki and buying property. So those interesting. So you had 13 doors when you started. He told you to sell those. You sold those. Are you considering how are you thinking about it now? I know that you guys are building a team. You're building, I believe, and are like, what's the goal now for your real estate business? And
Yeah.
then in getting out of the business or just leveling up from there.
Yeah. The one thing I've learned is that when you're looking at from becoming a salesperson and you get obsessed with what you need to do to become a good salesperson, it's easy because you have the mentors to find. They're rather easy to find, and when you're around really good people, you're able to be like, hey, what do you do that works? And then you could implement the same thing. Being a leader kind of role and trying to actually recruit, retain, train is not that easy. And that's another whole skill set to develop. Um, the to a certain extent, you see a lot of people who will grow massive teams, and they'll have like just recruiting like crazy, like crazy, like crazy. Maybe that method works, but that's not a method I believe in because I think that for a core group to be successful, everybody needs to be in alignment with core values, and there needs to be a culture set in there. So I think a smaller, more um, well-tuned team is a better way that I'm aiming towards. So that way, it's the culture is there, the vision is there, everybody's bought into the vision, and everybody's succeeding. You see these teams that are 20, 30 people, but then the production for the whole team is 200-300 transactions. If the average commission after their split is like $5,000, each person's making $50,000. Is that you investing in the person in your team, or is that you just kind of just doing it for you? You know what I mean? So I don't believe in that kind of thought process. So the vision, to answer your question, is to try to get the key people that I want, which I'm looking for at least 2 or 3 more people to add in. And that way I'm able to have a core group that is really just focused on resale and just reinvesting profits in from there into their personal building of wealth. And yeah, that's just really it's been the focus moving forward.
Cool. Yeah. So having kind of a like a Navy SEAL team. This is just a bunch of snipers that are just really good. Get on the phones and working with buyers and sellers, transacting. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. So switching gears to you guys, I've seen you get to start this Light It Up podcast, you and John.
Yeah, man.
And I've seen it from I was on the podcast, which was awesome.
Yep.
And it's taken on, a whole different life from when I was on even. I mean, we had guests like, Mike Ferry, Tom Ferry, Matt Ferry, some big guests, some big movers and shakers in the industry.
Yeah.
So I guess what made you get started with the podcast? And I know you guys were an influence of mine getting started too. And what's the goal with the podcast, and why even continue to do it?
It started off as like a kind of a psychotic way of having an accountability setup.
Okay.
We were fortunate enough to be involved with a mastermind with some of the top performers from the MFO, side of that world. And, we were having these amazing high level conversations on a regular basis. Why don't we just start recording it so we can make content? Because we keep hearing this whole thing about creating content. So we're like, why don't we just record it? So we went to the studio. John initially bought a bunch of the equipment, and then he was hitting up one of this photographer he knew. And then he just said, why don't you go to the studio near you and just record it there? So we ended up going there. We ended up buying a bulk of sessions, so that way it would force us to actually have to go through it. And then we just filled up the calendar. I think you were in the top 10 of the first episodes that we shot.
Right.
So once we started off with everybody that was like essentially like our core group of people, we started expanding from there and taking on new guests. And that's like a whole nother skill set to learn too, right? The first couple of episodes, I know there was some alcohol involved to get us through the episodes.
I remember you saying that.
And there's like a lot of technical difficulties to learn past. But dude, it's tough. It's not easy, especially when you have to guide a conversation and you're like, well, should I have said it this way? Should I have said it this way? Right? What's the cadence of which you speak? Like how is the conversation flowing? Right? You learn over time, like I'm the one that will focus on trying to go through the emotional part. John is very highly analytical, while he'll focus on strategies and tactics. So there's a good mesh where it's becoming a very well-balanced kind of conversation when you're able to identify what those strengths are. But as of right now, the goal for it is really to try to create a culture and a community within it. We don't get paid to operate the podcast. We're paying it out of our own pocket. And it's just because we're enjoying those conversations. And that exposure leads you to so much more to gain for yourself. So,
yeah, what I've noticed too is you first have these first conversations with people and you're like so focused on what you're going to say, just like kind of when you're working through scripts, right? And then sooner or later, you're starting to get some more distance from it, and you can you understand like what your audience wants and how to ask questions, and you're right. It's such a skill to get to a new skill to master. And then with the direction you guys are going is awesome, and seeing what you guys are doing is really, really cool. And you're doing a lot of them. Like how many are you doing per week?
Yeah. So we're recording roughly 2 to 3 a week.
Wow. Okay.
The most we've ever done was 5 in 1 week. We just started releasing 2 every single week that we've had. It's been about a year and change, like a year and a couple of weeks, under 11 months, under 13 months. But the amount of growth that we've had is pretty insane. So in total number of views that we've had across the whole platform, it's almost 200,000. Mind you, a month ago, when you look at the last 28 days on YouTube where we've been, we had 17,000 views for that month. And if you look at the last 28 days that we've had, it's right now at 35,000. So it's growing at a pace. And I was doing a slide deck the other day at a 171% rate month over month, which is pretty insane. Our subscribership base is growing at a 115% month over month. Across all platforms, we have close to 2 million impressions. When I did it about a month ago, it was 1.7 million. So right now we're right at that. We're over 170,000 watch minutes. and that's out of 52 episodes that we've released out there. So it's growing. It's just we're learning how to do it, and there's still I have this on my desk. Like this is one of the guests that we actually interviewed, right? And I'm like bookmarking and like highlighting everything in there because it's just a complete foreign animal to us. Um, so just learning different things to try to optimize it to get it in front of the right people. And I wrote these notes, and this is actually probably helpful. And you did
Yeah.
mention it a little bit, but in terms of like the things that just are new that I just found out recently, it's the questions you have to ask yourself is who's my ideal audience, and what questions does my ideal audience have that need to be answered, and then you have to say what's my niche, what do I do better than anyone else, and then how do you word the things and the titles that people will actually search for it. So we started off, we're like, all right, what titles do we name it? It's everything is so methodical that you're learning it as you go. But it's a super fun process, man. And meeting the people and creating the relationships through it is what makes it more worthwhile than anything else.
Totally. Yeah, that's really cool. I know Joe Rogan. When he like, because I listen to Joe Rogan, we all listen to Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
It's like he reads the books before he has people on. He needs to understand like who they are, and that's, I mean,
Yep.
it's kind of difficult as you're having 5 people on per week, or even 3, and like you don't know all the guests you're having on. I mean, you know of them, but you don't know their specifics, and you probably need to read something about them or do
Yeah.
some research before you have those conversations, right?
So like for instance, we had Matthew Ferry on, and Matthew Ferry was like very influential for me. Although I never actually got coached by him privately or whatever the case it is, a lot of people who were mentors to me gave me a bunch of his things to learn, like his NLP training. He had the sales velocity book that he had. So I would listen to that maybe like every week for a long, long time. So I knew everything about him and his method and what he was like, how he was coaching through it. So it gives you a lot of context out of that conversation. But it's almost like prospecting, right? It's like coming from a place of curiosity about one thing, and then you get surprised by those conversations. Sometimes you can have a lot of information about that person, and it gives you a little bit of a direction to go in. But sometimes when you know nothing about that person at all, it actually makes it fun too, because you can have just general conversations, and then one thing will spike your interest, and then you just get extremely curious, and then you start going down that rabbit hole, and then everything else opens up from there. So it's 2 spectrums. I'd rather know nothing at all, or I'd rather know a lot, but I wouldn't want to know in between, because then you're making your own assumptions. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So you guys, I also see you doing webinars,
Yeah.
with some of the guests, and I think some of the people we both know, like, and then I think you're also, I know you just had Pace Morby
Yep.
on the podcast. I'm not sure if have you had that one already? Have you had the
We had him. It's about to be released. It hasn't been released just yet.
Cool. So I think Pace, like, so I'm a big fan of him. The one thing that he, amongst like his creative financing, that sort of thing, right? But I think what Pace does really, really well is build community.
Yep.
He does a great job of that. And he sees the big picture. But I know that you were talking about having some of those webinars in terms of building community. I know that's one of the reasons why you said you're doing the podcast. So,
Yep.
like, what's your thought process on building community? Like, why build community? Why is that important in this day and age? And then, yeah, what's really the reason why you're doing it? Why you're building community?
So whenever you're putting out content out there, it's or just information, first and foremost, you have to remember you're like essentially cloning yourself, right? And you're cloning yourself over and over and over again. And there's a lot of misinformation out there that can be taken out of context if you don't create a community around it. So as weird as it is, it's almost like you are held accountable if you don't. Like it's actually bad if you don't create a community around the information you're putting out there. Because if you're not creating your own narrative and your own story to guide people, if you're sharing that information, if they find another resource, but they get inspired by it by you, then you're the one that screwed it up. A perfect
Interesting.
example, yeah,
Yeah.
a perfect example is when we started the podcast, there was 2 people, one girl specific. She thought that John and I were unapproachable because the way that we were doing the podcast, we were having it at a professional studio. Just because of our credentials, we were both platinum agents, and we're doing a high production. So she was very intimidated to come and approach us and have a real estate related conversation about coming into an EXP platform or something like that. She saw the YouTube channel. She watched a bunch of episodes. She went into someone else's downline expecting it would be kind of like a everything all inclusive kind of program, which it isn't. And then she started reaching out from there. Right. it's not like I said no. I brought her in, I gave her everything that she needed just because she was like into the podcast, and it was just nice to have someone that enjoyed it. Um, so she got all the information, and she's like, I wish I knew that you guys were approachable and that like you guys were going to be sharing all this information. I had a misunderstanding of how it actually worked. So once that happened a second time, we were like, all right, this is actually like you almost feel bad when people are getting interested from your content and then they go to something else that's sounds similar, but it's actually not. And then it's almost like, oh, well, you guided me to them, but you weren't actually creating a community to actually take me a step further to it.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
So I talked to John about this too.
Yeah.
It's funny, I was talking to John on the day that he came over to EXP.
Yeah.
And I was talking, one of the reasons why went to EXP and transferred over, my dad had a Remax brokerage for many years, and then he was aging out of the business.
Yep.
And I was like, well, I wanted a business that has like a cap on it, like, like a Keller Williams or something where I can performance cap, where I can get moved to 100% commission. That was important to me. And then someone explained to me EXP, and it was like, it was so complicated. The way they explained it, I was like, doesn't even make any sense.
Yeah.
And then I hired a coach, Jason Samard, who I wanted to like take myself from like a single agent to a team, and grow my team. So I'm like, I need to find somebody that has done this before. So I hired a coach just for that reason.
Yeah.
He was with EXP. He was just like, hey man, like I'll share with you everything. Just come over and just join EXP with me. I was like, what? Really? He's like, yeah, I'll share with you everything. Don't worry. Don't pay me anything for coaching. Just come and join. And everything I do, I'll share with you. And this is why, because I'm completely incentivized to share with you everything. And we can grow and collaborate together. And everybody in my organization, we can share everything. We can just collaborate together. I was like, oh, and then you're incentivized. He's like, I'm not incentivized by profit. I'm actually incentivized by revenue.
Revenue.
50% of top line revenue. I'm like, wow. Like, and so at that point, it was like, okay, this makes complete sense. And why I should do this, because if my progress for him to share everything he knows with me is all going to be in direct correlation to how well he succeeds too. So I was like, the light bulb went off. And I was like, dude, everybody's coming. Everybody's coming. Yeah. I mean, is that what you guys thought? Is that kind of how you thought about it too?
That it's like, yeah. So the main reason why it's like, it was a very, you hear all those memes where it's like, oh, you're peeing in the bathroom. The guy comes up and he's like, hey, EXP. That's the whole stigma we had around it. We were like, no, we don't want to be involved. Like we're all good with that. And then one of the mastermind groups that we had, they were like, hey, listen, there's this mastermind group. It's super exclusive and it's happening in February. Do you guys want us to get you tickets? Mind you, no one was EXP in this organization, in this mastermind group. So we were like, yeah, let's go. So then we end up going. And on the plane, I'm showing John the ticket. I'm like, yeah, this is the event. And on the bottom of it, it says EXP, like event fast forward movement. And then he looks at me, he's like, bro, this is a freaking EXP event. I'm like, no, we're going to be tortured and like trying to be sold on this whole thing this whole time. Like, what did we do? We get on a plane, we go to the event. There's about 200 people in that room. Everybody is like either a mega team or like they're running a super profitable or a super big team. I wouldn't say, I don't know if they're profitable or not. Won't say that. They're running good teams, right? I don't want to label it, but they're running big solid teams, people doing 100, 200, 300 transactions and whatnot, right? And we're in this room, and then some people go on stage, and they're just like, here's how a showing agent works, and here's a QR code. And then if you scan the QR code, all of a sudden you get a Google Drive with the whole SOP, the standard operating procedure of how to do it, what the job description looks like, how to identify that person, and what they need to do. And John and I look at each other, we're like, we've been killing ourselves trying to recreate the wheel of trying to put it in one by one, that it's like, those are the most frustrating things that aren't our strengths. So why recreate the wheel when you can just get a carbon copy? So that was similar to yours. We're like, maybe this could make sense, right? And then we learned about how like the downline matters. And then from that point on, we're like, all right, so what do we want to learn from who we want to be with, right? So for us, it was more important to learn systems and procedures, because that was something that we felt like it would we'd have to take a step back to actually learn, which would hinder production. So that was like super important for us. And we were like, okay, that makes perfect sense. We're going to move forward with that. After that, you learn a little bit more about what else is there. So like the more value you provide to your organization, people around you in the community, whatever the case it is, you can get paid through the profit share system, right? and sorry, through the revenue share system. And it's also another way of retiring, right? So like, for instance, your dad, when he got out of the business, there was no retirement. If he wanted to sell the brokerage as it is, yeah, great, he could sell it, but then that's only going to last him so long, right? He doesn't have a retirement fund that's going to keep giving and giving and giving, right? It doesn't grow on its own to a certain extent either. So it's almost like, if you are truly investing in the agents that you have in a team, right, and you're trying to pitch people to come in as value, but you're not thinking about their future and their end result, then it's only for instant gratification, and you would be a smart person to know that they're going to leave you eventually. But if you're putting them in an organization that there's longevity to it, and they actually grow and they have a cushion towards the end of their career that can last them for, well past they're gone, then you're actually being a great leader, and you're actually putting them in a position where they're going to succeed, which you're accountable for putting them in. So that was the second part that got us over.
Dude, I love that, Kira, because I don't know about you, but I never thought that way from the beginning. Like, I just didn't think that way. I was thinking, and I don't think we were trained to think that way. Thought trained like transactional as realtors. We trade our time for money and stuff.
Yeah.
But like, I was having this conversation with my cousin. We just went skiing, and her dad helps people, like coaches people through like exit strategies. And we just had a birthday party last week, and he was like, well, you have to, like, sometimes you have to sacrifice that for building something for the long run, for the exit strategy to sell it, right? Because I was like, well, in real estate, you really can't sell your book of business. I mean, I'm sure there's people who've done it. It's just difficult. And, but like when you kind of start thinking about, hey, I'm building something to help people succeed for the long run in a way that's beneficial for them, with their best benefits in mind for success, that might not be like so fruitful like today. However, like 10 or 3, 4, 5 years down the line, it's gonna pay dividends, and also it's just going to be make life easier, moving forward. So
it's interesting because the most successful teams that I've personally shadowed, and John's actually shadowed with me as well. So Chase Ames from the Ames team, Bernie Gallerani, and Josh Barker, they're all great real estate salespeople, but on top of that, they're even better developers of individuals, right? So like, they are really good at developing individual people into just generally all-rounded great people, right? So not just necessarily salespeople, but just all-around great people. Most recently, we were shadowing Bernie, and we have Bernie on the podcast coming up this Friday, which I'm excited about. We were walking through, and he's like walking us through, introducing us to agents, but he's not introducing them based off of production, right? He's introducing them based off of accomplishments that they've done that they're the most proud of. So you can see how the focus of development was there. So, for instance, he'll introduce us to a girl who was 28 years old, and she was making just an exuberant amount of money, just shy of like $1 million, essentially. And he was like, hey, we're going over tax strategies and investment strategies. Like, that's like what they're coaching on, right? And it's just like, you could see his face light up, and you could see her face light up because of the belief in each other and knowing that they're going to guide each other to that common goal. So they have an alignment there. So that's that leadership part of it that is it's not simple to do that, right? Because you're investing 100% of your energy in that aspect. So, the EXP model makes it a well-rounded, organism or ecosystem, so that as a leader, you can actually do that, knowing that you're actually not putting your family in jeopardy, because you're sacrificing your own self to be selfless and actually focus on your team development for individual persons. You know what I mean?
Nice. Yeah, I do. And so that's awesome. And and we're all just trying to be better. I mean, for me, I know that you are too, just trying to be better leaders and trying to figure out how to do that. A lot of times, so next, I guess a good question here is, how are you learning that skill? Like, and who are you tapping into? Because a lot of times I think that's like, it's definitely a mindset skill. I'm getting better at that.
Yeah.
It's being more altruistic, being more open, learning how to have less ego. How are you getting better at leadership? I mean, and again, we can, we're talking about like SOPs on like strategy, like on all these SOP checklists. It's like, that doesn't help with getting better at leadership.
Yeah. It's interesting because it's a never ending process. And I think I'm actually like horrible at it at the moment.
Me too.
Yeah. But it's my Steve right now, Coach Powers, Steve Powers. He, I asked him a really good question. I shadowed Bernie and then I called Steve and I was like, hey, like Steve, sorry, Bernie Galarani has like he's really blessed to have the right people in the right seats as he was growing, right? He had a key role person for ops. He had a key role person who really set the foundation of the culture, which was his first buyer's agent, Raymond. And those key people helped him explode. And he has his wife, Wendy, who's amazing, who helped the whole back end process of everything. So he had the right people in the right seats as he was building it up. He didn't have to go through that finding process. Like it almost like he attracted it when he was ready to build. I was like, how do I start? And he's like, you need two things. And this resonated with me so much. He said, vision and integrity. So there's a book called Four Virtues of a Leader. I forgot who the author is. And he essentially talks about the same thing. It's like your vision needs
But
to be so
I would
dead
argue,
on.
not to interrupt, you have that.
Yeah.
You have
I
that.
appreciate it. But
Yeah.
but the other part of it is being able to translate it effectively too, right?
Okay.
So
And you have that too. I have
oh,
to say.
thank you.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
It's a skill that I'm learning. Maybe it's the confidence in self and the confidence
Sure.
and competence to be able to deliver it is missing, right?
And you know what? Also, and I'm curious to know your answer, but I just want to like I think from with what I've learned that I'm doing the same thing is like I learned just banging my head against the wall. So like you just like you I don't think maybe like that Bernie. I think Burley probably went through that same process of just like doing it and like banging your head against the wall, and then you're like learning like the confidence through doing it. So anyway, but so
no, but that's a good actually point though too, because when we were talking to Bernie, he brought in his lead buyer's agent or his first buyer's agent, Raymond, and then Raymond was like, yeah, Bernie's developed over the years. Like in the beginning, he's like his expectations were unrealistic, right? He was expecting everybody to want to work the 12, 13, 14 hours that he was, right? And then Bernie was like, yeah, because that's what I was doing. You know what I mean? So it's like manage expectations, which is like, it's almost like the pain of every person who's a good salesperson going into a leadership role. It's unrealistic expectations, right? Thinking that everybody's gonna be the same way. So he went through that pain cycle. And then he even said it himself. He's like, I realized how everything started going, like everybody started the whole organism started producing so much more and being so much more successful when he kind of removed himself from like, what are you doing? What are you doing? What are you doing? To like, I don't want to know anything about what I'm not good at. All I want to focus on is developing the individual in front of me. And that was his key thing. When he was just focusing on what he was good at and what he actually enjoyed in the organization, that's when everything started flourishing even more. So
I love that.
That's like, you could see that cycle through there. So yeah, I guess it's finding out what that niche is that you are, what you're good at within the organization that can help it develop. But it's definitely, bashing your head against the wall, one minute's frustration.
Yeah, frustration. And then like, I mean, I was just talking to someone, I was like, I'm just completely frustrated. And then you have that person, like his wife, or you have an ops manager you trust. And that takes years to get for them to develop, to understand you and then to understand the business. Yeah. And once you have that person and you can trust them and then back away, and then just be like, hey, let's just meet every week and just give me a report of what's going on. And then like, you're not like managing people, and they're like, and then everybody else is like, hey, like we do a lot better with you not on the calls, or like we do a lot better with you, like, and you're like, okay, well, thank you, because I want to be released from this, Yeah.
It's interesting because Josh Barker, he coined it so well to me, and it's interesting because you catch things, you don't learn them, right? You just catch it when you're ready for it. And he's like, the company's an organism in its own. It's like its own separate thing, right? We tend to sabotage it by putting our own emotions into it. For example, let's say you love an agent on your team, right? And they're a great agent. But for your company, it needs agents to be operating at a 50-50 split, for example, right? Agent comes in, they're saying, oh, well, hey, this company's offering me a 70-30. Emotionally, you might be triggered to say, well, I like you as a person, like I really need you, but what does the company actually need? Right? The company needs to be able to be profitable, to grow, develop more agents, to be able to scale. So the company can't actually do a 70-30 split. It can only do a 50-50 split. So that wouldn't be in alignment with what the company wants, although it might not be in alignment for what you want. So in essence, you might be great at being able to identify people to bring into the company, but you might not be the best person to coach them to develop them. So you need to always think about the company as a separate entity or a separate organism from you, because you're not the company, right? If you're trying to develop a company and create something that you can create an exit strategy with, you actually need to think of it as a complete separate being. And when he kept saying it that way, I was just like, that makes a lot more sense, because a lot of the mistakes that you make that you look back at and you said, I should have done that differently, was because you kept focusing on how you were going to do it, not who needed to do it
Mm,
for the
mm,
company. You know what I mean?
mm, Yeah, no, that's good. That's really good. So if we back out, and let's talk about like just before I let you go, is like getting started in real estate. What would you have done different if you did it again? Also, if somebody is getting started, first year, just beginning, how would you go about it? What would you do? How would you have patience with yourself? Like, how would you look at it, and how much time would you give yourself? How would you do it different than
Yeah.
what you did?
Um, I would have gotten into coaching way sooner, right?
Right.
I think the environment that you put yourself in, it matters more than anything else. So surrounding yourself with, I didn't know that there was teams. I don't think there was teams when I first started. That was like 11 years ago. So it's surrounding yourself by people who have higher standards. You learn that goals and standards are like the flip side of it. So if you have high goals, but then the standards that you're willing to accept are very low, there's no way you're going to hit that goal. So if you surround yourself with people who have very high standards, you're inevitably going to have the same equal standards and be able to develop, do
I
more.
love that.
So I would just surround myself with, if I had to do it all over again from the get, with people who have extremely high standards for themselves. So that way I would be able to become that early on and get a coach and a mentor, and be involved with some kind of organism so I can focus on one thing instead of multiple aspects of the business. We get into it and we were like, oh, how am I going to upload the listing now? How am I going to schedule the photography? Am I going to go there myself? If you could just focus on one thing, which is just how to talk to people, you cut that learning curve significantly. And then it doesn't make it a pain in the ass, and you're able to progress, because that's the thing you get paid for, the communication, not for the uploading, not for the scheduling of photography, not for coordinating showings. All that is just bullshit and noise, right? So
I love that. Like, and you do not realize that unless you've worked with somebody or a coach or somebody that has a process that's different. Like,
yeah,
so an agent, we just hired an agent. She's not going to the inspection. I told her, don't go to the inspection. And like every one of the agents before her have gone to, on their first deal, have gone to the inspection.
yeah,
I was like applauding her. I was like, that is amazing that you're not going to inspection on your first deal, that you can trust the process so much that you're not going to inspection.
yeah,
Like, see, people, she got ridiculed from the listing agent from not going to the inspection. She I was like, this is amazing. Like you should be so proud of yourself. And
yeah,
but you would never know that unless you work. I would have never known that for like 3 or 4 years into the transaction, or into doing real estate. Like, that's wasting my time.
yeah. But the flip side is, if you went to an office, like my first office that I went to, the standard was so low, and that people used to get trophies for getting 2 deals done a month, right? And then in your mind, you're like, damn, that's rewardable. That's my new goal, right? And then your actions reflect the same, and your habits on a day to day are essentially what that goal is to do too. So it's, if you set yourself around, if the bar is set high early on, it makes it so much easier for you to want more, and to put the activities and the actions that will correlate with that result and that outcome. You'll see a lot of people, like for us, we've always struggled with having like recruiting agents that have experience, because those bad habits of being able to get rewarded for making, 5 contacts a day, that's acceptable standard, right? But we got surrounded by the Mike Ferry organization, and when you go to those events and you see people who are doing hundreds of deals, and you like learn to correlate skill development with the income that you earn and the life that you want to live, and then you just become obsessed with that you're raising that bar for yourself, and you're not willing to accept anything less. And that's why people like us would always transition brokerages to want to be surrounding around your own collective, not, someone else's narrative.
Totally. Kiro, man, it's a pleasure always speaking with you, man. I really appreciate you coming on, giving us the time. I know your time's valuable. You don't have to share. And how can people connect with you? I know how to, like, they can go in and watch the Light It Up podcast, I know for sure. But how can they connect with you? What area are you serving?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So based out of Hudson County, New Jersey, right across from Manhattan. If you want to connect directly, I'd say Instagram is probably one of the best avenues. So that's Kiro.n.Nasralah. Or if you wanted to, you can reach out directly, 201-312-7708.
Awesome. I appreciate it. And
Thanks,
you
man.
have a great day, man. And we'll see you soon.
Sounds good, John. Thanks,
Okay.
brother.
Bye.